Each and every day, more and more people get locked up and end up in our overcrowded prisons, deprived of freedom. They were left to decay until some were either demolished or turned into museums. Some of the horrific things that have happened behind the walls of some of these prisons that we're about to mention haven't gone completely forgotten. Old spirits may also still roam the hallways. From prisons that are semi-submerged underwater to the prison where some shocking experiments took place, here are abandoned prisons.
Alright, are you guys ready for another haunted, possibly mysterious video? Let's check it out!
Number 12. Fort Delaware. Fort Delaware was originally constructed as a fort, as the name would suggest. It was determined in 1794 by a French military engineer by the name of Pierre-Charles L'Enfant that it would be a good spot to build it. Constructed on a strategic island in 1846, where the Delaware River begins to get more narrow, Fort Delaware held much importance in defending important cities like Philadelphia and Trenton. During the Civil War, when the North was beginning to gain the upper hand, the fort was transformed into a prisoner of war camp for Confederate soldiers and local political prisoners. It was also known to house some more notable high-ranking prisoners, including a total of a dozen generals. During its peak, it held as many as 12,595 prisoners at one point in time. Eventually, in 1944, the site would go abandoned and turn into a state park. The site would be a great place to hide out at during the zombie apocalypse, and is even complete with a moat. Number 11. Eastern State Penitentiary. Located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, this penitentiary was active from 1829 to 1971 and held notorious criminals such as Al Capone and the bank robber Willie Sutton. It was considered to be the world's first true penitentiary, which is by definition a prison for those convicted of major crimes. It promoted separate confinement for rehabilitation, which means a lot of people here lacked human interaction. Many prisoners would often complain about the conditions here and that the doors were extremely small to get in and out of. Eventually, in the early 1900s, they decided that solitary confinement was getting too expensive and prisoners would be allowed to share cells due to overcrowding. There was also an insane prison escape that took place here by Willie Sutton and 12 other inmates who dug a 97-foot tunnel that allowed them to escape. In modern times, it's considered to be a preserved ruin, and they allow for spooky ghost tours during Halloween time. Number 10. Patarei Prison. This archaic Russian prison on the seaside town of Tallinn was originally built for the site of a fortification in the 19th century in order to protect the sea routes to St. Petersburg to the east. It doesn't matter whether it's winter or summer, if you got sent to this seaside prison, you weren't going to have a good time. However, just by taking a look at this prison, you might start to believe that it's possibly the most haunted place in Europe. This strategic fortification was operational as a prison since the beginning of the 2000s, but now it's a permanently closed prison. This was built in a neoclassical style, but the design is entirely unique in comparison to other prisons or fortresses in Europe. You might not even think it was a prison until you go inside and see the barbed wire fences. The total square footage of this complex is about 17,000 square meters, or about 56,000 square feet, making it quite impressive. Today it stands as a dark tourist attraction, and it also makes for an interesting venue for modern day events. Occasionally, this former prison is even transformed into a venue for raves. Number 9. Old Charleston Jail. This old jailhouse from the 19th century was rumored to be haunted by many inmates who had to do time here. It was operational between 1802 and served as a county jail until 1939. The jail consists of 4 stories and was topped with a 2-story octagonal tower until it was heavily damaged by a rare earthquake. During the Civil War, both Confederate and Union soldiers were imprisoned behind these walls. It was known to house many pirates who would await trial before their ultimate demise. One of the more notorious criminals was Lavinia Fisher, who was the first incarcerated female serial killer in the U.S. The jail closed in 1939, but the tales of ghosts here continue and was featured on an episode of Ghost Hunters. It's currently owned by the American College of Building Arts, who purchased it back in 2000. Number 8. Rummu Prison. This abandoned prison, located in the country of Estonia, was once considered to be Europe's Alcatraz. A quarry was formed to gather marble in the 1930s, but it quickly became a prisoner camp where subjects were forced into a life of hard labor. Near the quarry are 2 prisons, which the most visited one being Rummu Prison. Groundwater began to rise here and it submerged the prison, but it's surrounded by crystal clear water and white sands. Once the empire of the Soviets had crumbled, so did many of the buildings too. This flooded prison, which was once home to much human suffering, has also become a tourist attraction for thrill-seeking scuba divers. Built from limestone, this housed an estimated 7,000 convicts between 1930 to 1931, and many were forced into hard labor for nearly 12 hours a day. It might not look like too much from the outside, but inside, there's a seemingly endless amount of things to explore underwater. Here in this photo, we see some scuba divers swimming close to the barbed wire fences that once surrounded the enclosure. In present times, local Estonians enjoy having picnics in the area. Soviet prisons in Estonia were like a little slice of hell, and maybe the reason it's become a popular tourist attraction for Estonians is to remember their history in a non-aggressive way. Number 7. Moundsville, West Virginia Penitentiary. Many would call this place the Alcatraz of the East, but in reality, it was a lot tougher and is considered to be extremely haunted. This Gothic-style, fear-imposing penitentiary is home to the notorious Old Sparky, which was put to use on 94 people between 1999 to 1959. On top of it, the building is right across the street from an old Native American burial ground known as Grey Creek Mound. It was constructed in 1867 and took 9 years to build. It operated from 1876 all the way until 1995. After West Virginia seceded from the rest of Virginia, it left the new state with very few public institutions like prisons, and this is why it was built. Eventually, the site would become the testing grounds for the electric chair, but was also the site of forced labor, being home to a coal mine. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, this was one of the most violent prisons, with nearly 1,000 people losing their lives behind the walls. Number 6. Holmesburg Prison, Philadelphia. Another creepy prison in Philadelphia, the Holmesburg Prison was possibly the worst in the United States to be an inmate at. It was here where many controversial human experiments took place that involved biochemical weapons as well as dermatological and pharmaceutical tests. Many of these tests were downright cruel, and they took place fairly recently between 1951 and 1974. The book title is referencing a statement made by dermatologist Albert Kligman, who made a creepy statement about seeing acres of skin in which he could experiment on. The more you look into it, the more you start to lose hope about the compassion people have on their fellow man. This is a true house of horrors that we can't get too much into detail about, but watch out. Number 5. Karosta Prison. Don't be expecting to get a nice relaxing vacation if you come to Karosta Prison. This is located in the city of Liepāja in the neighborhood of Karosta. This is one of the most notorious prisons in the Soviet Union. It's made of red bricks and was originally built as a hospital in the early 1900s until it became used by the Nazis and the Soviets who occupied the country. In modern times, it's used as a hotel if you're looking for a little punishment and want to sleep in a haunted Soviet prison. Courageous tourists only pay $16 to stay here, but that seems to make sense since you sleep on a mat on the floor. The workers try to recreate the conditions as close as possible so people can get an understanding of what life was like as a Soviet prisoner. It's home to many recreations with realistic uniforms and decorations. We'll just hope this guard doesn't watch this woman too closely. Number 4. Ohio State Reformatory. Another creepy abandoned prison, this one is located in Mansfield, Ohio, and was built between 1886 and 1910. It stayed in operation for over 80 years until a federal court order demanded that it be closed. In 1861, the area was used as a training camp for Union Civil War soldiers, and later on, it was decided that it would make a good spot for a reformatory. The doors of the building first opened for 150 prisoners who were brought by train and put to work on the prison sewer system. They also helped build 25-foot walls that would keep them from escaping. Prisoners kept complaining about the overcrowding and the inhumane conditions in the 1980s. Eventually, a court case demanded that everyone move out by 1986, but that date would be pushed back to 1990. This was due to a lack of a replacement facility. Since then, the abandoned prison has been filmed in many films, TV shows, and was even the setting for Shawshank Redemption. Number 3. Wyoming Territorial Prison. Our next place is one of the oldest prisons in the state of Wyoming, and it's the Federal Territorial Prison located near Laramie, Wyoming. It operated as such from 1872 to 1890, and then eventually it would become a state prison from 1890 to 1901. During some of the earlier years, it was almost impossible to maintain order, and out of the 44 original prisoners, 11 of them escaped within a 2-year period. As 5 years had gone by, overcrowding had become an issue, and its reputation got worse and worse. It was home to the legendary Butch Cassidy, who was incarcerated here for 2 years. Eventually, the prison would close and was donated to the University of Wyoming. Eventually, it would become a National Register of Historic Places in 1978. Number 2. Carabanchel Prison. Here we have an abandoned prison in Western Europe in the country of Spain, and it was a prison used for political prisoners during the Spanish Civil War. It was one of Europe's biggest prisons until it closed down in 1998. It hosted a wide variety of occupants, including members of the socialist, anarchist, communist, or Marxist supporters. Others might have been in support of Basque independence and were put here to sense their revolutionary ideas. It had enough room for 2,000 men and about 500 women until it was shut down. It would eventually get looted and heavily vandalized until it would eventually get demolished in 2008. And number 1, Alcatraz. This infamous prison, located on an island in the San Francisco Bay, is an iconic image of the city and possibly the most well-known deserted place in the world. Alcatraz Island was originally built as a fortress, but later on transformed into a military prison in 1868. Then, it would become a federal prison in 1963. In 1986, it became a National Historic Landmark and can be reached by a quick ferry ride. The lighthouse is the oldest one built on the West Coast, and legendary escapes from the prison have turned into movies.
So what'd you guys think of that video? Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. We'll see you next time.